Hi Smallies and welcome back to yet another episode of the Small Girl. आज का एपिसोड थोड़ा डिफरेंट है एंड ऑनेस्टली इट कम्स फ्रॉम अ वेरी पर्सनल स्पेस. ये एपिसोड उन सारी लड़कियों के लिए जो या तो एक वर्किंग वुमन है, या तो मदर ऑफ अ वर्किंग वुमन है, या तो एनी गर्ल हु इज एंटरिंग इनटू द प्रोफेशनल सेटअप. This is about the POSH Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace. This episode is made for you by a working woman with a lawyer. Of course, we're going to get to know about her journey, but उसके बाद तुरंत ही we'll get to know what are the next steps to do. How do you know if you're even getting harassed? Where did this act come into place? And why is this act only meant for women? So please stick till the end. Comment करना अगर हमने कुछ मिस किया या कोई ऐसे इंसिडेंट जो सारी लड़कियां पढ़ सके और उन्हें पता चल सके कि ये हरासमेंट होता है. And also please share it with any woman or any person who needs to hear this. Thank you so much. I'm super excited for this conversation. Firstly, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So Vaneesha, tell me this. Was this lawyer ka bhoot or keeda always there in you, that you always wanted to be like, hey, I want to be that person who derives justice like all we see in Bollywood movies? Or how did law happen to you?
Not at all, actually. Personally, I'm very interested in science. And what I really wanted to be was an astronomer.
Wow.
And I think what studying law formally has enabled me to do is continue to pursue amateur astronomy as a hobby.
That's interesting.
And then I realized that, law is actually a very interdisciplinary field.
Okay.
So if you're someone that enjoys multiple different things,
Okay.
It's a great place to be. Because with law, I mean, when you're in law school, in one of these national law schools, especially the way the curriculum is designed, you study over 50 subjects within law.
In 4 years, right?
In 5 years.
In 5 years. Alright.
But also, if you're studying law as a 3-year program, you've probably done an undergrad degree already.
Yeah.
And so overall, anyone who's a lawyer has probably some background in many other subjects such as sociology or economics or political science. And I think the other thing I realized was law helps you work on your language skills, your logic skills. And through law school, I think what I really learned was a way of thinking. A way of thinking critically and thinking from first principles. So I think that's what pushed me to study law, and I think that's what I've gotten out of it. They say, you can always find the law, and it's getting easier as we go along, right? Information is not a problem. But it's really about how to think creatively, how to think analytically, how to think logically, how to put things together and see whether they make sense, and to find your way out of tricky situations.
Wow. I mean, I have done consulting myself, and for me, I was relating a lot to this because in consulting also, we have to think logically, we have to think from first principle, we have to be 80-20, MECE, logical, but I never ever looked at law with that lens. And today, when you talk like this, it now gives me perspective, because where are lawyers not there, right? We have them in corporate offices, we have them in government institutes, we have them in social services. So every decision or every business or transactions that are happening which involves people, money, we need a lawyer.
And that's just the corporate world, right? You see lawyers in academia. A lot of famous politicians have a legal background.
True.
Apart from the courts, lawyers are working with NGOs. There are activists who are lawyers. Amongst my close friends, there are people who branched out into marine law, environmental law, space law, biotech law. And gendered law, of course, gender-based law. So all of these fields which are very different than your traditional civil and criminal law courts versus corporate law and M&As. So of course those are the more popular and traditional ways of pursuing law, but there are lots of different options, and I think more and more coming up all the time.
That's very interesting. But how did you find your calling? By you're specializing in copyright, data protection, you're also involved with POSH cases, and how did you find your niche, or is this your niche?
That's a great question. I think I was one of those people that was kind of stumbling about, interested in lots of things, and I think my way was exploration. I consider myself privileged for having had the opportunity to do that exploration, and also had the courage to do it in some way, so it's a combination. I started out with IP again because I find copyright law very interesting. I got to work quite a bit on, issues within the music industry, what artists do, and how royalties are distributed, things like that. In general, I enjoy art, I enjoy music, so it's like that bit of law that intersects. I've always had a fascination for human rights or even environmental rights, so I kind of left and I wanted to work in the policy, non-profit spaces. So I did a bit of that. Then I went and did my master's. Again, got to learn many different subjects. I think purely guided by interest. I've had the luck and privilege of having some very encouraging mentors, and I would encourage all your listeners, whoever can, if you can find someone to just hold your hand and guide you, it means a lot. And it's not that they have all the answers. No one else really knows what's right for anyone. But I think just someone to have that faith in you and push you in the moments where you feel underconfident. But I think through my 20s, I had people telling me that not only is it okay, but it's actually good to be uncertain, to be confused. And I needed to hear that so much.
I love that. And I mean, I can vouch for this because I am 26. I've already done my MBA, so master's is done. I've worked for 4.5 years, and still when someone asks me what next, I have to take a pause. But I'm very interested in understanding, like, women in law, right? For a noob, like, I really don't understand how the law space looks at women as lawyers, and what is your take on that? Like, is it one of the great places for women to practice, work, etc.? Do they get cases very frequently? Is it an easy way to present themselves in front of the court, or how, like, your stance on women in law?
I think being a lawyer, and I've learned this more and more over time, I see it more and more, being a lawyer is a place of power. And so a lot of times as a woman, you tend to be overlooked, spoken over, interrupted, not taken seriously, dismissed.
Really?
In general, right?
In general,
as a woman.
Yes.
But in my experience, the minute a person gets to know that you're a lawyer, there's a certain, then I want to listen to what you're saying.
Exactly.
And it's caught me by surprise a lot of times in very like everyday social situations. But I would say, so as a, it's one way for women to access power in a not just professionally, but just it translates into your daily
experiences as well.
In hindsight, I can say that I think the field of law is one of the more gender balanced professions.
Wow. This is very interesting. And from your profile, the one thing that really stood me out, of course you've done amazing work over these years, but one thing that I very much want to talk to you about is POSH, right? And like, I would just wanted to understand and make our viewers understand the importance of POSH by this podcast, right? Why don't we start with, when did POSH happen and how did it come into existence? And if you can tell them what does POSH even mean, that would be great.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is that a lot of people seem to have heard the word POSH now, which is great and also different because because I graduated in 2011, the POSH Act didn't exist. At the time. It was legislated in 2013.
That's very recent.
That's very recent. It's been a little over a decade.
Yeah.
And we're still working on implementing it well. So, but let me start at the very beginning. You did ask me to introduce POSH for those of your listeners who may not know. It's an acronym that stands for Prevention of Sexual Harassment. And to be honest, that's kind of become the buzzword and it's easy to remember.
Yeah.
But the name of the law that it refers to really is the Sexual Harassment of Women Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013, which is a mouthful.
Yeah,
right?
that is, definitely is.
But what becomes very apparent from the name of the actual law is that it is looking to protect women. So it is gender specific when it imagines who the aggrieved person is, possibly. And there is a legislative history to that.
If you can tell us about it, it would be really interesting.
Sure. So I think the first time this really came into the public imagination is there was this incident where an agricultural laborer in a small village in Rajasthan, whose name was Bhavri Devi, was gang raped in the fields that she worked at as a form of retaliation by the members of a family in which she had gone to intervene to prevent a child marriage. And she was doing that as part of her role or her job as a Sathin worker working with the government in a program to prevent child marriages. And just like you would remember in more recent memory, the Nirbhaya case really caught the public imagination. There were a lot of civil society protests, a lot of women activists, women rights NGOs got concerned and really got behind Bhavri Devi. Of course, she filed an FIR, she faced a lot of difficulty getting it registered, and then going through the court, she faced a lot of biases within the police system, the judicial system, and all of that. Meanwhile, a bunch of women's rights NGOs got together and filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court saying, look, we don't have, one is to go this FIR route, but you can see it's full of hurdles and challenges, it takes forever, there are lots of biases, so we need a law that protects women when they're at work. We need some sort of protection, and since we don't have one in India and Parliament hasn't enacted one yet, can we look at these international conventions that we're part of? So there is an international convention called the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, called the CEDAW for short, that India is party to. So they said that allows us to have these kind of protections. Can we just look at that since India is a party? And the court in 1997 gave a list of guidelines, essentially, which got translated into the POSH Act in 2013. But you will realize there's a huge time lag, right, between 1997 when the directions from the Supreme Court came out and 2013 when the POSH Act finally got enacted. It's been sitting as a bill since the early 2000s. And again, I would say it was kind of a reactionary push, and again the civil society pressure post the Nirbhaya case, which happened in 2012. So that's why we have the POSH Act, and it is very recent. In 2023, again, there have been cases going to the courts, even under the POSH Act, and the Supreme Court used one of these cases to again give out directions, just like it had in the Vishakha case, in the public interest litigation. This one as well, to say, we finished 10 years, how are we doing on implementation? And they found that while, maybe in the corporate sector, again, in more, the tier 1 cities, the multinational corporates are conducting these seminars, these awareness sessions. Really, the larger population in India is still in the informal sector. Where are the local committees? What are the government institutes doing? Do you have a POSH policy in place? And they found, unfortunately, it's pretty abysmal. So in 2023, again, we have the court stepping in and issuing guidelines and directions to the government as well as private companies to start implementing more vociferously.
Wow, that's actually I'm kind of upset and surprised at the same time, because it needed a Nirbhaya case for the government to go ahead and be like, hey, we need a law for women at workplace, right? I mean, that's a sad reality. But and upset again because the major chunk of women who work right now are in blue collar as well and informal sectors as well, and how are they getting protected? But like more and more I feel that what are these different misconceptions or notions that these women have about the POSH law, right? Like, you've spoken to so many of them and you speak to women on and off. What are these different misconceptions or myths they have regarding the POSH law? What you've heard?
The women in particular?
Women in particular, yeah.
Sure. I think one of the biggest, I don't know about myth or rather a misconception that I would love your viewers at least to be rid of is that I need evidence. If I don't have evidence, how can I raise a complaint?
God. Okay.
And think about it, we're talking about sexual harassment.
How are you going to get
How
in
many
there?
people are going to engage in sexual harassment in front of a CCTV camera? It doesn't happen. So, the organization that I work with, all my colleagues and I, we work quite extensively to also train internal committee members or POSH committee members on how to evaluate evidence. And when I say evidence, the popular imagination is that of direct evidence.
Yeah.
I've heard people use words like material evidence, hard evidence.
Yeah.
What they're actually referring to is direct evidence. So if we do have video footage or we do have a screenshot of certain messages that were sent, that is what we call direct evidence. And in sexual harassment cases, there are many times where
They don't
this
have
doesn't
that.
exist.
Yeah.
There are other forms of evidence that can be considered. So one is called hearsay evidence.
Okay.
Hearsay evidence. So even things like witness testimony can form part of direct evidence. For example, if someone were to come and say, I was there when this person made this comment, so I heard it as well. That is direct evidence. It's
That's
someone
direct
coming
evidence,
forward
yeah.
and saying, I was there, I heard it, I saw it, and I'm willing to testify under oath.
Yeah.
But there are times when, like I said, there's no evidence. Of course, there's no third person
There's
there.
no third person, and then the person feels that, hey, I don't have anything to prove my, the statements that I'm creating. So they just don't go ahead and file the case.
So I can give you examples, right? We deal with a lot of complaints that come in, and it could be because of the place that the incident happened. So it could be either an actual physical act or the threat of physical sexual violence in a private space, whether it's an office conference room or a hotel room or a cafe or during an off-site or something like that. Or it could even be verbal messages on the phone, or in person, but one-on-one. Right? And we can rely even on witness testimony, even when a third person wasn't actually in the room or part of the call, but whom the aggrieved person has confided in.
Immediately after
the incident happened. Or someone who's able to say, I wasn't in the room, but I saw her running out crying. And she's usually a very chirpy person, and I even went up and said what happened. Or I was sitting and doing my work, and this person is sitting next to me, and I just noticed that as soon as that other person walked into the room, she started shaking. Shivering, panicking, sweating.
So your reactions are also evidence. People noticing those reactions are also evidence. Your confinement after the incident is also an evidence.
Right. And all of these other kinds of evidence are what we call circumstantial evidence. So what the internal committee is looking to do, and for this they do have the powers to speak with, of course, the complainant, who we call the respondent, who's the person against whom allegations are made, as well as any witnesses, to try and recreate what happened during, but also before and after the incident. So to take into account the totality of circumstances and then come to their conclusion, right? And they don't, a lot of people have heard these phrases that become popular in TV series and movies, like innocent until proven guilty, right?
Yeah.
Which is true, and it's a principle of criminal law. The other thing about intent, right? What if someone doesn't intend or says they didn't intend to sexually harass another person, but they have said or behaved in a way that made somebody else feel very uncomfortable, and the behavior was sexual in nature. Intention is generally not considered relevant in civil cases. So there is that difference between broadly civil and criminal law. And what we tend to hear more popularly is all criminal law stuff because it's exciting. But POSH is a civil law legislation, and the standard of proof that committees are required to go by is what we call the balance of probabilities. So after they evaluate any evidence that may exist, whether it's direct or hearsay or circumstantial, what they're looking to establish is, in the totality of circumstances that we've put together, is it likely that this incident that is alleged has happened or has not happened? So there's often not like a middle ground, right? It's either if the person who's complaining has no real motive to fabricate the allegation.
Something exactly against a person. Definitely understand.
Then, so it's it's true or false. It's hardly, there's hardly ever a middle ground as such.
Got it. That was a very detailed definition and explanation of what the act is all about. What I'm picking out of here is these three major words that I think people should know the definition for, right? Like, one is, hey, what is sexual harassment, right? How do I know if I'm experiencing one? Number two is, what is workplace? Because nowadays, people are working from home, working from office, etc. What's the boundary? And then last thing is, what is an employee for an organization, right? Because you said, right, like there are so many gig workers coming up, there are so many people who work on consulting projects. Can you help me define these three words?
Sure. So let's start with what is sexual harassment at the workplace. And that workplace bit, and we'll of course talk about that in the second bit of your question, but that's the big difference between the POSH Act and the already existing legislations for the other spheres in which sexual harassment can happen. For example, in the home, in the private space. So of course we have criminal law already accessible. At any point of time, someone can go and file an FIR with the police. And that is completely mutually exclusive of the POSH Act, right?
Got it.
But what we're looking at with this is when sexual harassment is experienced at the workplace. And so we tell employees this as well. One of the main things you're looking at is the act or behavior that has made me feel uncomfortable. Is it sexual in nature? And just because it's someone of another gender who has behaved badly with me, and I'm feeling really uncomfortable, doesn't make it sexual, right? It could be an aggressive behavior. It could even be discriminatory. Someone has used a very abusive word towards me, but it is not sexual in nature. That won't fall within the
POSH
purview of POSH.
Got it.
Having said that, if the behavior is sexual in nature, it need not be physical. A lot of times people think only of physical sexual harassment as real sexual harassment. But even if someone at the workplace is using really loose language, a senior is constantly referring to a younger female colleague as darling, sweetheart, honey, and she's feeling really uncomfortable.
That exactly.
And she's not able to confront that person or tell them, please stop, I'm not liking it. That's quite possible, right? Because there is a power dynamic there. There is a hierarchy. This person is her senior. Whether that person has used loose language, asked her out for some kind of a romantic or sexual favor, and she's not comfortable. That can also be considered sexual harassment. And it's not necessary that the person has to inform the other one that they're not feeling comfortable. So we tell employees that the onus is on each one of us to watch our behavior, to watch what we're saying to our colleagues and how we're behaving with them, whether it's verbal, physical, even psychological in some ways, or even visual, sending messages, texts, reels. If it's not professional, not professionally required. If we're trying to even build a friendship or a rapport, whether it's with our teammates, our colleagues, our juniors, our seniors, there is sort of a line, and it's not a black and white line, right? We have different lines with different people. With some of our close friends and colleagues, we might greet them with a hug when we see them, but that doesn't mean we're okay behaving like that with everyone
with a colleague. Exactly.
Right? So to watch, to communicate our personal boundaries, but also really become attuned to other people's personal boundaries at the workplace as well.
Got it.
So if you ask me for a quick definition of what is sexual harassment at the workplace, it's any action or behavior that makes somebody feel uncomfortable, that has been done without their consent. And when I say consent, I mean active, explicit, enthusiastic, positive consent, not just silence. That is sexual in nature, and that has some connection with the workplace.
Got it. And the next definition, like, what is a workplace?
So when we talk about workplace or even employee, since you asked me that as well, both of these terms have been defined in the POSH Act very, very broadly. The idea is to extend maximum protection. So when we talk about workplace, we're really looking at this idea of an extended workplace or a notional workplace. anything I'm doing in the course of employment.
Yeah.
Anywhere I'm going in the course of employment or because of employment. Wherever I'm working from. So over the pandemic, most people worked from home. Even now, most companies that I know of, at least in Bangalore where we're shooting right now, many corporate
have a hybrid model
have
or a
hybrid,
work from home
absolutely.
model. Yeah.
So when somebody is working from home, their home is their workplace, right?
Yes.
And so and there are a lot of case laws as well, even pre-pandemic, but definitely growing in number post-pandemic. When the aggressor or the person who's making you feel uncomfortable because of sending, say, sexually colored messages, asking inappropriate questions, whether that's happening in the office or outside the office, whether that's happening during work hours or after work hours, is irrelevant. What really matters is what the impact is on the person at the receiving end, and whether that impact is that it's created a hostile working environment for them.
For that person. Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes we see, especially in workplaces, because there is a workplace hierarchy and a power
Dynamics, yes.
if it is my senior that is saying something that's making me uncomfortable, whether that's happening because they're calling me at 1:30 in the night and asking me all sorts of inappropriate personal questions, getting into the sexual domain or romantic domain as well, in a way that's not consensual, that's not mutual. Will have an impact in the dynamics of work the next day as well.
Basically, what does hostile workplace environment mean is that I don't feel safe enough in working with that person or in that particular team or environment.
And a lot of times we do receive complaints, especially from younger employees who end up filing a formal POSH complaint at the point where they're ready to quit. Because it feels like I need to, because the environment has become so hostile that it feels like
there's no other choice but for me to leave my job.
And that's exactly why we have this redressal mechanism in place now, why we don't want these employees to quit, because they're not the ones that have done anything.
Exactly.
Wrong. And to that extent, just to finish up this section, since you did ask me, the definition of employee is also very broad. So there's one thing, action can be initiated by an internal committee or a POSH committee of an organization that is employing the respondent. The person against whom any allegation comes in has to be an employee of the organization. And think about it, it's logical, right?
Yes.
Because if they do conduct an inquiry, they want to be able to ensure that the person shows up.
Yeah, exactly. And is still working in that company.
And that any action they recommend can be implemented by them.
Makes sense.
And to that extent, though, the employees that they have that jurisdiction or that power over includes not just permanent full-time employees, but also part-time employees, also interns, also volunteers who are not being paid, also contract employees. So it's really broad. The idea is anyone who's doing some work to carry on my business and who's answerable or reporting to me in any capacity is someone that I have some power over to take some action against if found guilty of the allegations.
And this I didn't know actually, because in first sense, like, people feel that I'm an intern, I'm a volunteer, etc. So they don't relate that because I'm not getting paid by the company. If you're not on the payroll, you're not the employee, but that's so wrong.
Yeah, and for the POSH Act purposes, they are specifically included. Having said that, the aggrieved person, the person who's filing a complaint, need not be an employee. So the definition of aggrieved woman under the POSH Act specifically has that phrase, whether employed or not. The idea is even if it's an outsider, even if it's a visitor to an office who gets sexually harassed by one of their employees, can approach their internal committee and say your employee has behaved in this manner.
So any suppliers or anybody, stakeholders, salespeople, etc. Wow, this is very important. What's the next important thing I feel that everyone should know is what are the steps that one should take? For example, if somebody has gone through an incident, right? What are the next steps that you would advise them to do?
I think the first thing is it's okay to take a couple of breaths. It takes a while sometimes to process what has happened. And once you process that, I would advise two things. One is, if you can talk to somebody, confide in someone, it's a good idea to do that. If you can, if you have the wherewithal, come directly to an IC member. All organizations are told it's part of their legal compliance. They have to put up the list of who the IC members are and their contact details in the office. So physically on a notice board, or at least on their intranet or through. So you can find out who those people are. If you're comfortable with any one of them, or you want to even approach the external member, who's somebody who's on the committee but not an employee, so someone who's experienced, who's sensitive, who's unbiased, do call up one of them. And talking to an IC member doesn't mean that you're immediately filing a formal complaint, the other person's just going to be fired immediately, nothing like that. You can approach them for advice, for counsel, for guidance as well. So to get the support that you need to process what has happened, if at all there is something that could be used as evidence. For example, if there are messages, there are call recordings, there are even call history. So someone's been calling incessantly at 11 to 12 in the night, they've given you 10 calls that are missed calls. You can possibly take a screenshot of those missed calls. That also can be evidence of the fact that they called you. Keep that. Keep that, share that with someone. If you can, but at least keep that, or keep that in a pen drive separately, so that it's not destroyed. Sometimes if there are instances where very dirty messages have been sent. It's human nature, it's human instinct to want to wipe that clean. I want to delete it, I don't want it on my device. Understandable, but because you may want to file a complaint later on, even if you think in that moment you don't want to go through that, just save it somewhere.
Take a screenshot, send it to someone and be like, hey, I'll need it
somewhere. Put it on a pen drive and put it away. Give it to someone. So preserve evidence if you have it. Try and note down the broad details of what has happened. When, where, who, what, why, as many details, right? The way trauma works is sometimes we blank.
We just shut that shop
on some of those details, right? Even non-traumatic events. If you ask me, what did you eat for breakfast 3 days back? I don't know. But especially with traumatic incidents like this, we may or may not remember things. So in that moment, it's also a way that might help you process. If possible, write down what has happened. Speak to someone, and do come forward and speak to an IC member as soon as you can. Again, you did ask about misconceptions. IC members are sensitized, and I won't speak for every organization because not every organization has engaged in compliance to the level that they should, but good organizations with robust committees are obligated to try and enforce confidentiality, to very importantly provide you with interim relief. What that means is, for somebody who's filed a complaint to not have to continue to work with the person who has sexually harassed them. So the committee has the power and will take immediate steps to make sure that you don't have to interact with that person anymore. Whether it's by changing a reporting line, whether it's by changing a seating arrangement, they are also empowered to allow people to work from home or even go on paid leaves. Right? So all of those measures. So I would say come forward as soon as you can.
This is very nice and detailed. I have 3 questions in this, right?
Sure.
Number one, what is the time duration, right? For example, you said that take deep breaths and internalize that what has happened and take your time. But what is this time? Does it have a duration? A. The second question that I have is, maybe you can take this and take it.
Sure. Before I answer that, and there's a really clear answer in the POSH Act, but in terms of interim relief, to also say that a lot of companies have employee assistance programs, including access to counseling, and that is also something that you can actively ask the committee to enable, which helps. And coming to your question on timelines, I think it's important to come forward within maximum 3 months is what the law says, what the POSH law says. Within 3 months of the incident having happened. And sometimes it's a series of incidents, right? Somebody's constantly texting. Maybe the first time they did something, you decided to ignore it because you thought maybe You're not sure why they sent this message. Maybe they didn't really mean to. We don't want to believe it's happened. We don't want to deal with it. It just seems too big to take it up, hoping that it'll stop. The problem is, if anyone tells you ignore it, it'll go away. It's probably better not to listen to that advice. Ignoring these kind of instances sometimes ends up emboldening that person to continue that behavior either with you or with others because there are no consequences. So that's the other reason we do encourage people to report it. And while the law says 3 months, number one, on the one hand, the committee does have the discretion to extend that by another 3 months. So total timeline of 6 months, but not beyond that. Beyond that, it can be taken up, but perhaps as an HR issue, right? An internal company issue, but it won't be taken up formally by the POSH committee. But also, just because we have a timeline of 3 months doesn't mean we should wait 3 months. If you can, raise it within the week. Because the sooner you raise it, the reason behind that is not only will you remember what has happened and be able to speak to it more directly with the committee, but also any witnesses who the committee may want to speak with will have more context and more memory
to support
of the specific details. And sometimes the devil is really in the details in these cases. Sometimes it's just the committee is able to come to that totality of circumstances, the balance of probability based on simply a timeline of what has happened. Right? So the sooner we raise these, the better the committee is able to assess all of these, because the better information they get even from witnesses or surrounding people.
Got it. What about the route of FIR? Like, is that, like, do you suggest any person going through, like, hey, why don't you go get an FIR done? Or you feel that that's a personal choice, or the POSH can handle it and maybe then you can go to the FIR if you don't like the POSH's reply or process, etc.?
So one very important thing at the outset to remember is that the POSH process and the FIR route are completely mutually independent. They're separate.
Yes.
And any person has the right to pursue both, either or both. Filing an FIR has no timeline. The POSH process, like I said,
has that timeline.
The POSH route can only be accessed when the sexual harassment is connected to the workplace.
Got it.
Right? Having said that, there is also a timeline within the POSH process for completion of inquiry proceedings.
That's 3 months.
So it's 3 months, you're absolutely right, within 90 days, right? Which the police route and the court route, there doesn't seem to be any timeline there. I would say, and you're right, it's completely within the, I think the law allows for the person who's aggrieved to decide how they want to proceed. You can again approach your organization for any support that you need if you're going the FIR route. There is an obligation, a duty on employers to support an employee that wants to file an FIR. In my experience, the FIR route is suggested in a couple of scenarios. One, of course, if the incident that's happened has no connection to the workplace. The other is we don't know who the respondent is and whether they're an employee. For example, this happens a lot with cyber crimes, where you're receiving messages, threats, and you suspect it could be an employee, but there's no way to show it. The third very important one is, to some extent, there are policies in place within the POSH policy of an organization, as well as the disciplinary code of conduct, etc., other policies, to help with addressing and punishing retaliatory measures when they happen within the organization. But if you're scared that a person may physically threaten you outside of the workplace, then I think the right way is to approach it. So those are some situations in which you might need to get the police involved.
So again, like, this is coming from a place where, suppose the person who's gone through this entire incident, what are the implications of that person's career, right? Like, her name is getting, that's the fear, like, every girl has, right?
Absolutely.
Like, what about my career, and what is the, like, but in my head, does the name get ever revealed?
That's a great question, and that's absolutely valid and true, right? That anyone who file, anyone really, what do we want to be known for in our workplaces is how well we're doing our specific job, right?
Yes.
And I have had instances of people hesitating to file a complaint because maybe they were due for a promotion and they didn't want their name to be tied up with a POSH complaint and that affecting their promotion decision in any way. And that's justified. That fear is completely valid. And also, when there are these myths around false complaints and this fear around women misusing this law, we always respond by saying, actually, the reality is this, that women who have faced sexual harassment actually think 10 times before coming forward with a formal complaint. And one of the fears is this, that everyone will gossip about me, my colleagues will link my name first with this POSH complaint.
Then with what my work is.
Exactly. I think to help that, the committee, like I said, does do its best to ensure confidentiality. How it does that is, one, the committee itself is under a legal obligation not to make details with regard to the identity of the complainant or of the complaint public in terms of publishing it outside the organization in any manner.
Got it.
Having said that, to some extent, they might have to reveal bits of information on a need-to-know basis strictly with certain parties, for example, witnesses. They want a statement from someone.
Got it.
They might have to give them a little bit of context, right?
Yes.
Or with the employer themselves, with HR, for implementation of certain measures. Those kinds of things. Apart from the law, there are certain practical steps that companies can take as well. For example, anyone that's coming and speaking with the IC, whether it's a complainant, a respondent, or a witness, can be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. To say that I will not talk with anyone outside. So those are some of the ways in which the committee seeks to protect people. Having said that, it's not a perfect system. Office gossip can be curtailed to a certain extent. It works when we all understand what the consequences are. Sometimes we don't understand. We think we're trying to protect, my friend who's undergone this. And that guy who's done this to her, I'm going to go and tell everyone to stay away from him. But what sometimes that can start is a media trial within the organization, right? So people take sides, people end up isolating one or the other, and it gets really dirty. It creates a hostile environment for everyone. So really, no matter whom we're supporting or siding with, even if we're aware of something, the idea is we keep sensitizing employees. Please keep it to yourself, because both those names are going to be dragged through the mud. And it's not either or.
Got it.
So if you hear something, and I want to say this again because, at any point, any of us may hear a bit of gossip. Try not to pass it on. Shut it down.
Yes, please do shut it down, because you don't know what mentally that other person is going through and what this little gossip can do, amplify in her or his head or whatever.
And not every case results in a termination, right? So even after the committee has dealt with the case, both of them might continue to work in the same organization. So the idea is for somebody who's misbehaved to somewhat serve whatever penalty the committee recommends, but also reform, right? Learn from that behavior, make sure they don't do it again, but also continue to work in the organization. The idea is to prevent the creation of that hostile work environment. So very important.
So you said about one thing, right? A lot of women or people tend to quit their jobs or before they are quitting their jobs, right? How does a POSH complaint in, say, organization A affect, or does it affect in an organization B? Or is the company, for example, any company they are legally not allowed to disclose this whenever there is suppose a ref check happening for the employer or something like that? If you can talk on that.
So I'll just give you one line maybe in terms of the theories of justice. There are many theories of justice.
Okay.
So sometimes we do these surveys, right? If someone slaps you and you're obviously angry or sad or hurt, and there could be multiple responses to that. And what does justice look like? So one person may say justice looks like slapping the other person back. Another person may say justice to me is if they really understand how much that hurt, both physically and emotionally. I want them to feel that pain and perhaps apologize to me. A third may say,
I want to go with the philosophy of explaining that person that how this slapping is not good.
Yeah. Or I want some sort of guarantee that they will never do this to anyone else.
Yeah.
Right? So there could be many things. Or another person may say, I want to give this person so much punishment. I want to go to an authority that will punish them because they've broken the rule and make an example out of them so that nobody else dares to slap anyone.
Exactly. Got it.
So all of these can be classified, right? So one is punitive, which is punishing someone. The other is deterrence, which is punishing them so badly that they made an example out of as a preventive measure for all and sundry.
Yeah.
Another one is restorative, which is to do something which tries to put me back in the position I was before this incident happened. Right? Another one is retributive, which is more like an eye for an eye, a slap for a slap. Right? The POSH Act has a combination of these.
Okay.
The idea is to give a proportionate penalty. So a lot of factors are considered, right? What was the severity of the allegation? Was it verbal, physical? What was the seniority of the person who has been the aggressor? Assuming the allegations are proved. Has only one person been affected or multiple people have been affected? Has this person done this many times in the past?
Got it.
How has this person responded? Have they continued to deny and be angry and retaliatory? Or have they genuinely realized they made a mistake and the committee believes that they're going to change their ways? So all of these factors are considered when somebody is recommending what penalty. And they're looking at ideally a restorative form of justice. Which means that the idea is not, behind the POSH Act at least, that if someone has done this once and after they have served whatever penalty the committee has recommended, that they should never get a job again. For that reason, they do ask for confidentiality. So in background checks, ref checks, typically from a formal process, that file stays confidential within the organization. It is not formally shared. But I do know companies will put at least severe offenders on their own do not rehire lists and things like that. But we don't unfortunately have too much data about what happens to the careers of these people.
For the complainant, like the person who's complaining, does that person also, like how does that impact? Like for example, if a girl is complaining and she leaves that organization, goes to another organization, if there's a ref check happening for her, how does that impact? Will that ever come out?
So when the committee finishes an inquiry, they have to issue an inquiry report. Which is a detailed report, ideally, a detailed report of what processes were followed, what's a summary of all the statements that were made before the committee, what the finding is, what the recommendation is, and very importantly, what's the reasoning for the finding. And this report is to be made available to both the parties. But beyond that, to be kept confidential within the organization. So like I said, that confidentiality requirement extends to everyone within the organization who's been in charge of handling that complaint. From disclosing anything relating to the identity of either party, including the complainant as well, outside the organization.
Got it.
Especially publishing it in the media, press or things like that.
Got it. Is there an appeal factor here as well? After, if suppose I disagree with what the POSH says, and is there an appeal route here as well?
There is. So the law says that the committee, the POSH committee, actually has the limited powers of a civil court.
Wow.
So in terms of asking for evidence, production of documents, examining of witnesses, they're considered to be a quasi-judicial body. And just like when we have a judgment from a court that we're not happy with, we can file an appeal. Similarly, from a POSH decision as well, we can file an appeal. There's a timeline for it, but we can file an appeal to the labor.
And last question on this, right? What is the harshest penalty that the POSH committee can give a person?
Right, so because it's a workplace committee constituted primarily of employees in the workplace context, the harshest penalty is termination.
Got it.
Termination is different from resignation.
Yes.
Very important.
Very important. Extremely.
But also, I want to take this moment to also clarify that not every POSH case results in termination. And I'm saying this because we do have a lot of complainants coming forward and saying, what's stopping me from raising a formal complaint is I don't want that person to lose their job.
Really?
There is a culture of, I don't know what to call it, but a culture of sympathizing with
And creating scenarios that maybe they didn't mean it, maybe they were not in the right state of mind.
Right.
Bullshit.
So when we say zero tolerance to sexual harassment, we mean that every complaint will be taken seriously.
Yeah.
But penalties are proportionate, like I said, depending on various factors. And also, the complainant is given a chance to conciliate if she wants.
Got it.
Assuming it's a she. And it's the respondent may be willing to apologize. But if the complainant is not willing to hear it, they're never going to be forced into conciliation.
Got it.
But if they are willing to, because there are many complaints which do come in which maybe not very severe allegations. Maybe the complainant also feels like they're not sure of the intention, but they do need the behavior to stop and be acknowledged. So perhaps they're okay. What they're looking for is an acknowledgement and an apology.
Makes sense.
If the other person is also willing to agree. So it's very voluntary on both sides, always at the option of the complainant, never based on a monetary settlement. That's when the committee can also facilitate a conciliation. But otherwise, they do an inquiry, and the penalty can go anywhere from, say, a written warning or some sort of sensitization counseling, all the way up to termination.
I think I've got a lot of information from this session, and what I just want to say, and this is coming from a person who's also joined very young in corporate, has worked through startups and bigger companies. We need to start reading the POSH Act. And we try to skip it, and I know I have. On these sessions when we had the corporate trainings, I have not heard that session, right? And it's a humble request that today and whenever we join a new company, please let's go through the POSH Act. Let's know who are the stakeholders that are standing for us, like you guys. Reach out to these people, and thank you so much for being here. And is there anything you want to say, like, to all the girls watching this?
First of all, thanks. Thanks for watching. And I will echo what you said. Go through the POSH policy. It's there for your protection. Don't hesitate to share any instance, any incident that you may have faced which has hurt, upset you, especially if it's of a sexual nature. It doesn't matter that other people weren't affected. It doesn't matter that it was relatively minor. It doesn't matter that there was no evidence. If it's made you uncomfortable, if there is a sexual angle to it, even if it's just a threat, even if it's just blackmail, even if it's just a look, but it's making you feel like your working environment has become hostile because of that. It's not your fault. You're not imagining it.
You're not imagining it.
And there's no reason to stay silent about it. I think I'll end with that.
I think that's a good note. So don't doubt yourself and speak up. Thank you so much for watching this, and see you soon.